Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast, the Vibes That I'm a podcast, with yet another episode. And here today we have Claudia Montas as our guest. So, this is May, and it is Mental Health Month. So, it's super fitting, and it just was a synchronicity, right? That we were able to have this conversation to release this podcast episode in May for mental health. We both believe that mental health is extremely important and should never be replaced by your spiritual practice, but they do go beautifully hand in hand, right? Spirituality and mental health are aspects of our lives that can bring holistic wellness, as well as our mind health, just like intellectually, as well as our physical health with our body. So I'm really excited for you guys to listen to this episode and to watch our conversation here on YouTube. And make sure that you like and subscribe and just share this podcast interview with anybody that you feel might benefit from this conversation, as these conversations are here to empower our community, to bring awareness to our community, because just listening to somebody else speak about their life can really ignite change and healing into our own. So, looking forward to what you guys have to say about this episode. Welcome to the podcast. In this episode, we have Claudia Montas, a registered social worker intern in South Florida with a master's degree in social work. Claudia guides patients in a one-on-one setting to support them in resolving internal and external conflicts that stand in the way of achieving their personal, relationship, educational, and vocational goals. She also volunteers for BeWellPBC with the Palm Health Foundation as a coordinator for adolescents, training peers on how to identify and help those who may need or who may be experiencing issues with their mental health. So I know you personally from college. So thank you so much for being here on the podcast with me.
Good. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yay. So the first question that I usually ask is, what kind of sparked your start down a wellness journey or a spiritual practice?
So it started off in my I guess my senior year of college. Maybe I'm lying. It started off like roughly around sophomore year when I started to notice that my heart rate was spiking up. So I noticed it mainly when I was giving tours for the university. So I was a tour guide at USF. And I noticed right before I was going to give a tour, my heart rate started elevating, and I felt it. And part of me also heard it in my ears. So I became really attuned with my body starting sophomore year. And I was like, why is this happening? I don't have stage fright. I've always, at least I considered myself extroverted. But that really tested me like after sophomore year. So I noticed myself getting more attuned with my body then. I didn't know it then, but now with the skill set and the knowledge I have, I started becoming more aware about my body. And so sophomore year going into senior year, that's when I noticed my anxiety a lot more. It did felt like an elephant was on my chest. I actually went to the hospital twice when I was in college, thinking I was having a heart attack. And it's really interesting because back in college, I didn't like going to parties a lot, so I always stayed home. But those were also during the times that I was like out at the hospital thinking I was having a heart attack. They would do EKGs and everything, and they didn't find anything. And they would like drop hints here and there, and they were like, I wonder if you have anxiety. Do you know if you have stress? And I was like, I don't have anything to be stressed about. Meanwhile, I had like a full plate of things to do as part of sorority. I was an ambassador. There was a lot going on, and I was not giving myself any grace or rest. I had 2 jobs. I was doing the most in college. Yeah, I was really doing the most, actually.
Yeah, girl.
And then it was senior year where my body just really shut down. Again, I became really attuned, and I began having conversations with people about some of the weird symptoms that I was having. And a girl told me, she was like, you know, that's anxiety, right? And I was like, I didn't know that. Like growing up, anxiety and depression was often looked down on. There was like this notion in at least in my family, or at least my culture, that like if you had anxiety or depression, there was something really wrong with you. We also, adding on to that like spiritual lens, like like, because I grew up in like the church, like an evangelical church. A spiritual lens is that demons are attacking you, right? And just to pray it off. That was a lot of like what I heard growing up. And mind you, we can utilize spirituality as a tool. And I want people to incorporate that, like looking at a cultural informed approach. I want people to incorporate that as a tool, but not like the end all be all in my opinion, to be frank. And so
I have a question. So
mhm.
for people that are listening that don't really know you, what is your cultural background?
So my mom is Mexican American, and then my dad is from Dominican Republic. So that is my cultural Dominican and Mexican. But I grew up like my stepfather was Honduran, and so I grew up with different like cultures and communities in my household and different practices. So yeah, that's just my ethnic background, cultural background. It felt like it was a lot going on. I grew up with the opportunity to go to school with people from all backgrounds, and I was like a big learner, so I would sit on the school bus and ask all these questions and stuff. But ethnically and culturally, that is my personal background. um
Yes, because that can paint a picture for people that are listening in as to like how that wasn't a part of the conversation in the household. But you were
mhm.
talking about how someone brought up the fact that, hey, this is anxiety, right? And then,
Mhm. Yeah. So I was like, me? No, I don't have anxiety. That's like lame. Like, I don't have anxiety. I don't have that. I have my life together because I also grew up with the notion that if you have any mental health issues, if you have anxiety or depression or struggling with substance use disorder, your life's not together. And I grew up as someone who is a perfectionist. That's like my survival strategy that I picked up growing up. And I didn't want to accept or embrace that, but I was starting to learn it and start to be more accepting of having anxiety. I think the pushing factor for me was one day while I was at work, my whole left side of my body went numb.
oh my God.
And I think I was like in a state of like dissociation, and then I began to have a panic attack. I was having panic attacks all my senior year. Like I was crying in the stairwells, I was freaking out. I would dissociate often, where life felt like it was moving faster than myself, and I was just there observing people going by really fast. And then my body felt it, like my left side of my body went numb. And I remember being walked to by like my coworkers where I worked at USF to the nursing's office. And all I could really remember was a conversation that the doctor and the nurse were having. Mind you, the walls were not like ethical at all. I heard everything, and I was like, this is not good for HIPAA. But I heard the whole conversation. They were shooting off like autoimmune disorders that I might have. So they did all this testing, and it was a really expensive blood test to see if I have autoimmune disorders, and nothing came back at all. And so then I really started to really think about having anxiety and some symptoms of depression, because I remember getting a list. I think it's the PQ9, which is like the personal questionnaire that is questioning you about anxiety and depressive symptoms that you're experiencing. And a nurse at the clinic was reading them, and I literally checked off every box. And I remember I started to cry. She was really mean. Like there was no follow up from the clinic at all. So I'll be critical in that sense. She was really mean and was like, "Why are you crying?" And I was like, I'm experiencing all these symptoms. And there was no follow through again. And then that's when I left, and I said, I really need to get serious about my mental health because it's really impacting my physical health. The same time frame I got strep throat, and I had to miss an entire week of work and school. And that's right before I graduated college. And so I went simply on Google and was like, what can I do for my mental health and my anxiety? And I read a little bit about yoga. And so I was like, cool, I'll do yoga. So I found a yoga studio that was close to my job, and I started to do yoga, and I really started to feel really good about myself. Like I started to feel more regulated. I started to think more clearly. Everything was clarified for me. And that's where a lot of my wellness and spiritual journey began. That's where I was like, I want to continue my education in psychology because I got my bachelor's degree in psychology. and I wanted to become either like a therapist or just overall a therapist. The route that I was going to take, not really sure. I eventually chose social work because it has that social justice lens added to it, and I wanted to be able to provide like a care at the macro level. Let me backtrack. At the micro level, which is more individual, but also be considerate of the macro level, which is like the collective that impacts us individually. So I'm a big fan of collectivism. So I was like, social work is where I want to go. And it took a couple years. I was enjoying life after college. I was resting, but then I went back to school, got my master's in social work, and now, as you mentioned before, I'm a registered clinical social work intern, right now working at a substance use disorder treatment center. Mm-hmm.
Yes, yes. I remember you had told me that you were going to yoga classes to become a registered yoga.
Yeah, so I am a registered yoga teacher. Haven't been it so when I became an RWYT, no, RYT,
Registered yoga
registered yoga
teacher.
teacher. It was during the same time that the pandemic happened. So
Yes.
I wasn't able to teach classes, and then work was wild, and then I just went back to school. But I am looking at like trauma informed programs to get my 300 hours to build on top of my 200 so that I can start teaching yoga, but I want to do it at a like trauma informed lens.
Yeah, because it's insane how the body can really show you what's happening if your nervous system is a little um not calibrated, I guess is the best way. It's like overstimulated, overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
And like for me, it was the same way with yoga. Like yoga is what helped me start crying when I was like, oh wait, I have to cry. I didn't even know that. Yoga is what helped me like be more in my mind and just be able to have clarity and like push stuff out that I don't need.
Mm-hmm.
So that totally makes sense. But yeah, it's just crazy how the body can just pick up all of that and just it shut down. Even though everything was fine test-wise, it still wasn't okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the symptoms were really there. Um, and like my verbiage is going to sound weird because I always say symptoms where like our brain and our nervous system. I do that a way to not pathologize people or pathologize like our experience, because like mental health and mental illness is like overall illness. I would compare it to having heart issues or compare it to having high cholesterol. And so my symptoms were there, and you're right, the body does keep the score. Our brain is connected to our body, whether it be involuntary or voluntary, so it does speak to us. So that, I think, always going into our bodies, such as with yoga, um really can go a long way if we build on top of that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the beauty of that is that, it's a YouTube video away. So you can always go on YouTube, which is free 99.
Yep, it's accessible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So how we talked about how that got you started with yoga and kind of like the spiritual aspect, and you had mentioned that you wanted to be spirituality is important and that it should be included in someone's life.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot the verbiage that you utilized specifically, but I guess what I'm trying to get at with this is how important is mental health with someone's wellness practice?
So how important it is for us to like combine it, or
Yeah, because there's a lot of people that want to do self-care, self-love, self-care work, self-love work, affirmations, and it's more, sometimes it can be more trendy than it is like actual work. And
Mhm.
that's where I'm trying to get at as to like how, if you really would do want to have holistic wellness in your life and you want
Mhm.
to bring in more of that self-care, how does mental health play a part into that?
So mental health care is a form of like self-care. I guess if we were to like think about like pop psychology, like as you mentioned, what is trendy and what not, for me, it feels a bit like spiritual bypassing if we were to forget about talking about the hard stuff. And sometimes the hard, people who go to therapy aren't always going to talk about the hard stuff. We can talk about stress management and gaining tools to help navigate like our life and navigate day in day. But mental health is really important because one, like our brain is there, it's under our skin and under our caps and under our skull. So we really should look at it because you know, whether it be like anxiety, depression, or overall just like trauma, like our past plays a role in the present, and it has impact on the brain like as early as like 0, and like our neural pathways are developed as early as 0 to 3. We actually have neural pathways that like mirror like a full functioning adult. And so we have to really be considerate of how our life looked like back then. I've been hearing this a lot, like that's just the past. I want to forget the past. And it's like, no, like the past actually plays a role in the present. And we should really look at that and take care of it if we really want to have like a holistic like approach to our wellness. Like it has to be, like I always talk about building on top of foundation. So sure, we have this foundation to make us feel secure, like water and security and shelter, but then we also have to build on top of that foundation for us to have like whole wellness.
Yes, and by 0 to 3, you mean 0 years to 3 years.
That's correct. Yeah, 0 to 3 years, years of age. So as early as childbirth, like our neural pathways are starting to develop. And depending how like our attachment to our parents or guardians look like, it could develop maladaptive pathways or adaptive pathways. And so like those years are really critical. That's just one part of research. They say that those years are really critical, but I see that in my work when I do EMDR, I movement desensitization reprocessing therapy, because that can really help formulate or like it can help inform whether someone has like a regulated nervous system or emotionally regulated system, or help them see how, like it helps their perspective really. If we had to like kind of narrow it down, it helps their perspective on certain events later in life. It could be, okay, I'll have this good adaptive perspective on this, or I can have a maladaptive perspective on this. And then what that does is it like impacts our body based off the experience we're having in the moment.
Yes, and then EMDR, we talked about this a little bit before I went
Mhm.
ahead and turned it on, that for me, when I first heard about therapy or first learned what therapy was, it would just be whatever I would see in movies and TV shows as talk therapy. But this is a
Mhm.
different form of therapy that can help with mental health. So, if you want to talk a little bit more about this one since you work with this, or if you want to talk about other forms of therapy that are not just talk therapy that
Mhm.
can help people that are trying to find a way to heal their mental state.
Mhm. So I guess I'll talk about like modalities that I know that are not very talk therapy and are actually modalities that I'm looking to get like trained in or certified in. So like eye movement desensitization reprocessing is a form of like trauma therapy. So therapy that's like traditionally historically used for trauma, whether it be post-traumatic stress disorder, or even like complex post-traumatic stress disorder. But now it's being applied to different areas. So it could be a simple, well, not simple, but it could be implemented with people who struggle with anxiety, depression, substance use disorder, addiction, self-esteem issues, pretty much everything. So basically, it's like the name kind of like gives some information, but it doesn't. But it's using like bilateral stimulation or dual lateral stimulation. So just basically you could use different senses when you're doing EMDR. So traditionally when it first started, it was like eye movement desensitization. They would do it with the fingers, but now I have something that is the tapper. So it buzzes into your hands. So it sends signals to each side of the hand. And what that's doing is it's generating both sides of your brain to like activate. And we usually do that with feelings, with any memories that you may have, or with certain core beliefs. So I'll start off there, like people come to me with core beliefs they have, or certain feelings they're trying to navigate through. So we'll start off there. You don't necessarily have to relive the trauma or go through the trauma to do that when it comes to EMDR. And that's why I like it. You don't have to relive that. I mean, you can if you want. And if that's something that keeps popping up, we can work through that together, but we can really start off with the feelings that you're having. Or start off with any sensations in your body. So that's why I also like EMDR, because it's very like somatic aware, where we're going into the body and noticing what sensations are coming up. Because again, it's like the body keeps the score and the body tries to speak to us. And so with EMDR, we're doing just reprocessing of like information or memories or feelings, and we're going into the body for that. There's different like phases in EMDR. There's 8 phases, and I won't go into it too much because I wanted to be a surprise for people. No, I'm just kidding. So
Come see me.
It's like very they call it the standard protocol. It's like very like systematic, very organized, and very like sometimes we have to follow it by the book, but also we're free to like implement different concepts into it. So I know that Parnell has a lot of work when it comes to like attachment based. No, sorry, like my headphone is right here. So like Parnell, like Laura Parnell does a lot of work with attachment based or attachment focused EMDR. And so it's like mainly like attachment trauma. So there's different ways to do EMDR, but basically what we're doing is one, resourcing, so grounding ourselves, finding our safe place, and really setting ourselves up with like a not regulated, but we can return to homeostasis. If we become triggered, we can give ourselves that accessible tool, right? And then we go into reflecting on what's the negative cognition, or what do we tell ourselves or think about ourselves from a certain scenario or feeling or negative core belief, or phrases that our parents or guardians or peers would say to us. And then what we would rather believe about ourselves. So we're kind of going into the positive cognition. And then we do the bilateral simulation to desensitize one from that experience. So we're not making people forget their trauma or forget the certain core beliefs they picked up throughout life. What we're doing is alleviating the symptoms that are associated with that experience. So for example, if I was bullied by peers in elementary school, and I have this like negative core belief that I am not enough, what I'll do is kind of go through that experience of elementary school, and maybe like depending on what comes up in the session, it's really cool because simply what we're doing is go with that based off the symptoms that are coming up, the feelings and the body sensations. Based off what may or may not happen, I can get a different perspective from that event or that experience. And then maybe my positive cognition would be like, I am enough. And so what happens is my symptoms that may be like caught here on my shoulders would be alleviated. Or like the I am not enough, that may be a pattern that shows up later in my life and throughout my life, that may be like alleviated. But what's interesting is the I am not enough, like from the bullying in elementary school, may lead us back to an earlier event that informed that thought process. So for example, if I'm bullied in school, an earlier event may be that I go home, and when I tell family that I'm being bullied, it could be dependent on if my family member is like regulated or like dysregulated, and if they help me with that experience, or if I felt neglected in earlier childhood. So what we call that is a channel. And so like I think of it like a matrix. It's like I'm a visual person, and so a matrix, like this could be the event that we're trying to work on, but really it goes down this spiral, this channel that is actually from this event. So this might pop up during our session, And as the clinician, I would write that down, and that's something that we can explore at a later time. And so, or if I have enough time, then we would work on that channel. We would kind of go through that specific channel until we close it out, until all the symptoms are alleviated. After that, then we would go into implementing the positive cognition to that respective event, and then doing something like a future template. And so it's really concise and really thorough, and it can take like a while to do, because again, you'll have memories that pop up and we have to clear those channels out. So there's EMDR, kind of give you a brief synopsis on that. But then there's also brain spotting. I don't have too much information on brain spotting. I want to say it's similar to EMDR, but it's not. The research is based off EMDR, but brain spotting is like targeting certain sensations. And maybe I may be wrong, and whoever's listening to this can correct me by like going to my Instagram and going to my DMs. But it's like they're targeting certain sensations, and then they try to figure out where you're having that like symptom in your brain. So there's brain spotting, and then there's somatic experiencing, which is created by Peter Levine, which is similar to like The Body Keeps the Score. He has a number of books on how we hold our traumas in our body, and so somatic experiencing is like releasing that trauma. It reminds me of like ancestral practices of like kind of going into shaking. Reiki, like somatic experience, is really similar to Reiki in a sense. So basically it's using your body to release the trauma. So there's, I can compare it to dancing, but it's like a very more, like, again, it's like EMDR, very like protocol, like very like systematic. And so I'm actually doing that training in April. And so I'll probably get more information after my training, but I know it's us using our body to tune in and to kind of relieve the symptoms that are coming up from us. So like a book that he talks about, actually I have it right here, is like Waking the Tiger. And so basically it talks about how animals, they go through traumatic experiences, but they don't hold on to it because they release it in the moment. An example is like a zebra is being chased by a lion. They'll go through certain phases to help them like alleviate those symptoms. And so a zebra can be chased by a lion, and then like 2 seconds later, they'll shake everything off and then be completely back to like homeostasis and regulated. And so he did a lot of research in regards to that, and how animals are able to like release their trauma, whereas humans, of course, because we have different thought processes and different brains, how we store that and how we can kind of model what animals do to an extent. Again, this is like basic stuff that I'm gathering from the book that I'm reading to kind of release that trauma that we have stored. And of course, there's like, what is it? I forgot what it's called. Breath work. So we can also incorporate breath work. Besides like talk therapy. So there's different modalities in different areas that we could do other than talk therapy. But I do think incorporating it with like the body work that we do can really help a long way. Because usually in my EMDR sessions, we'll close the session off, do some resourcing, and do some like containment after the session. Then we'll talk about like, and process basically what happened. And during that processing, a lot more can come up with like negative core beliefs or messages picked up. A lot can be really like given to us from like a session like that. Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting because so it's like I feel like I've experienced the fact that maybe I'm upset about something in my life, right? And then I start working through that. And then, like how you said, something unlocks from earlier in my life. And I'm like, oh, wait, hold on. And I think to an extent of it, one way that I thought about it is like the safer that I feel in my body, the easier it is for me to open up those different memories so I
Mm-hmm.
can really go deeper.
Mm-hmm.
But also, it makes sense as to like how it's layered. It's all layered on top of each other, like the foundation and whatever that you had expressed. Um, and I guess it's interesting, like how long, I mean, it's gonna be a long process, but
Mhm.
within one session, right? If you have one session, they usually just take one belief that you're trying to work through, and then you do that, then talk about what happens, and then in the next one, you can either repeat that same core belief or the next one that's underneath it.
Yeah, so well, that core belief, like we can close out a specific memory and like one's perspective can completely change and they're changing the narrative from that one experience. But that that core belief can still be like persistent. And like I've seen it where like it's alleviating. Like if we were to look at a scale, like I am not enough, it could be like at a 10, and then it gradually goes down. So and that's just really dependent on how much the client really shares. Sometimes there's blocking, and you could see it with people when like they have their eyes closed, and like you could see when they tense up. So I notice body a lot because one, I'm bringing myself into the room. I know what my body did when I was suffering from certain symptoms of like anxiety and depression, and so I'm really like hyper aware of what are, like other people's bodies may say. But you can tell when someone's blocking, when they're like blocking or trying to push certain things down, and then you're like, okay, what's the severity of this, what's this, what's your sets, which is basically like the severity of different disturbance scale. And they're like, oh, it's a 0, and I'm like, like I don't think it's a 0, but I don't say that, of course, because that's their experience. But then the next session they're literally like, okay, like it was a 2, and so we still have to work on that. But it could be like different memories. So you can have different beliefs from different experiences. It's really like we're kind of playing it, we're playing it by ear, because like based off the memories that come up for someone, they can change what their belief may be, like their negative cognition and even positive cognition. So with the protocol for EMDR, we do have a reevaluation. Like, do you still believe this is like the positive cognition that you want? And a lot of the times what I've experienced is people are like, you know what, I want this one. Like I feel more assured and more firm with this cognition that I'd rather have about myself. And so it could be from like the whole process can be with one core belief or with different core like beliefs about themselves from different scenarios and whatnot. But a lot of the times we're closing out a channel, and that can be rooted from a lot of places in life. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's so interesting. I also like the book that you referenced regarding the animals in the wild shaking. I remember I went to a breathwork session.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was called a somatic breathwork session that was a little intense. Um, if you've that was one of the sessions that I went, I think I've done 3 times. The first time I did it in Ecuador. The second time I did it with this woman. The third time I did it with this woman again. But the third time that I did it, it seemed like someone went. And it was the very first time they did this. And the response that they had was actually very like triggering. That I didn't see someone do that before. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not the one facilitating, but it was just interesting in that moment. I was like, oh wow, like this is intense.
Mm-hmm.
That like the breathwork pattern that we were doing. But anyways, all that to just say that she had mentioned, the facilitator had mentioned that us as humans were born with emotions and that we need to let them run their course, but nowadays we try to push them down. And it's like we're born with everything that we need to be able to
Mm-hmm.
survive, the same way that the animals are literally being chased to death and then they're able to shake off whatever trauma they're experiencing. We have the tools under our belt to do that. We're just in a society that has disconnected a little bit from what we should be doing instead of what we think we should be doing. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So it reminded me of that.
Yeah, no, that, yeah. You're right. We are born with like emotions and overall like tools. I think there's a book called Homecoming by like Dr. I have her, it's right here above me. That's why I'm looking at it. Dr. Tema Bryant. She talks about like how we're really just returning to ourselves. We're not becoming someone new. We're really becoming our authentic self, like big S, if we're thinking about internal family systems, like big S, like self. Um, that we kind of were pulled away from with our experiences. It's kind of like an onion, like instead of an onion though, like layers will put on top of us. And with EMDR, what we're doing, overall therapy, what we can be doing is peeling off those layers and returning back to our authentic self. Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting that you brought up family systems because I am obsessed with family constellations.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to ask if you could explain what family systems are.
So yeah, well, there's internal family systems, which
Okay.
is basically what's going on within ourselves because we have like different parts that are showing up to protect ourselves. Like at the end of the day, what we're doing is protecting our like ego, not like in the like the context of like ego being like, someone who's stuck up, but like ego as in like our brain and our system. So we're protecting our ego with certain defense mechanisms. But family systems is looking at like our family dynamics, and internal family systems can translate to what pops up outside like in the family system. So there's different roles that each member play, and that could have been like verbally like directed to us or non-verbally directed to us, right? So for example, like we have the black sheep, we have the scapegoat, like we have different roles that show up in the family system, and they are really just navigating, like I want to just say through life, they're just trying to like live through life, but each role, kind of similar to the internal family system, is a way of protecting something. It could have been something that was carried down generationally speaking, so like generational patterns, generational trauma, or even it could have been embedded in our DNA as well, or at least our DNA could have changed similarly to how we can rewire our neural pathways. Our DNA could have been informed by like earlier family members' events. So there's this book called It Didn't Start With You, and it talks about how like our DNA goes back up 3 generations, and that informs how we show up, or even like informs um some of our like anxiety and our fears. It's really interesting, but again, it goes back to like how the brain function and how the brain is really just trying to survive, or like our brain is not here. I remember a professor saying our brain isn't here to, I don't know, watch TikTok. Our brain's here to survive and protect us. And that changed my like mindset back in the day. Like our brain is, and like that makes me feel like really like big compassion and give myself grace. Like my brain is doing its best to protect me and to survive. And that's how I like use it with my clients so that they can give themselves compassion to like, wow, look at what your brain is doing to protect itself and to protect you. Like, isn't that amazing? That's like called self-love. Like, and so I always bring that up. But we were talking about family systems and I got trailed off. Sorry.
Yes. No, you're good.
But
I love it though, because the book that you referenced, It Didn't Start With You. I had a dream about that too. I had it in my wish list for a minute, and I had it recommended to me by this amazing teacher. And then I had it showing up in a book. I had this like sage man just come up to me and was like, "You need to read this book," literally last week. And I'm
really,
mentioning it. Yeah. So I'm like, I need to get this book.
you do. I haven't finished it yet, but it's really good and makes me wonder um what my family members have experienced. Like growing up, I had this like huge fear that someone was going to break into my house, or like my house was going to catch on fire. And part of me wonders if that's because it's happened in the past with certain family members. And me being anxious and worried is just really my brain's way of being like, hey, look out, like this happened to us before, protect yourself. So I haven't explored it yet because my therapist, sorry, I'm charging my laptop. My therapist, like my personal therapist, has like a structure she goes by. And she's just like, we have goals that we first gotta accomplish. So so yeah.
Yes. Next time I do a family constellations workshop and it's like on Zoom,
Hmm.
I'll let you know.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't do them, but I just go to them. So
okay.
let me rephrase that, yeah, because I'm not the one facilitating those. But I love it so much. And when you said family systems with the big capital S of the self, and how family systems is a way for you to just protect yourself and protect your ego, knowing the way that spiritual bypassing defines as the ego, as in like you want to kill that off. I
Hmm.
personally feel like the ego is what makes you who you are authentically. Just that, and then you brought that up beautifully as to the fact that our ego, we're just trying to protect our ego. We're trying to protect who we are authentically.
Hmm.
Um, and then you talked about different roles that people play, which brings me back to a question that I actually wrote at the very beginning of this episode interview thingamajig about survival strategies. You had mentioned that you have picked up on being a perfectionist. And I just wanted to ask if one, that is a part of a role that can be played in a family, and two, if, oh God, my dog scared the crap out of me.
No.
Gonna have to. So what I was saying is perfectionist a role that you would play in a family, within the family systems thing that you brought up, and also if there's any other roles that you want to talk about or just strategies, like do they go hand in hand?
Yeah, I do think that they go hand in hand. Um, I think my role, so you're asking about my role as a perfectionist in my family system, or?
Not necessarily, like you don't have to go into it like personally. If you want to share, you can, but I'm not
Mhm.
asking you to share your personal experience.
Mhm.
Unless you want to, but just more about like what is a perfectionist? That's a survival strategy. Is that also a role? What are other
Mhm.
strategies or other roles that you might have in a family dynamic like that?
Yeah, so I know perfectionism shows up because it's someone who's attempting to keep like control the situation, because if the situation becomes derailed, um then like everything is over. So I know for me personally, when growing up, I was a perfectionist because it's what kept me like above water in a sense. Like I have everything in control, like everything is in order, nothing can go wrong. And so I know that's something that I picked up and have unlearned in college, because it was making me sick. It was making me physically sick to try to keep everything in order and control, and try to be someone who was more than I could be. And I just want to be frank. That's just where I come to. Um, but also like there's different roles. There's like like I forgot what it's called. It's like the clown in the family, so the jokester in the family. Again, for me at least, how I observe it is that they're trying to alleviate something in the family system. And so people who use humor as a defense mechanism are using it as a way to alleviate symptoms. It could be anxiety, it could be like trauma that's happening in the household. Again, it's a survival strategy to help people keep afloat. Then we have like the black sheep of the family, um, who's just different than like the family system in a way, or at least seen different because they like seem like an outsider. I think that's the family's way of protecting their ego too. So like at looking at a meso level, they're protecting their what has been for a while in their family system. So something that is like derailed or thrown off by a certain member in the family, then people are going to be like, let's I can't find them, let's make them like excluded, like they can't be a part of this family. So a family who's like a perfectionist and they have one family member who struggles with like health issues and is like very like it's evident they're struggling, like the family system may be like, we're going to place that person who's struggling on the outside so that we can keep this image of perfection. Right, or we see like black sheep family members with people who, like for myself, like people who are trying to call out like unhealthy dynamics or toxic dynamics, and the family who is still living in like a system of like survival, like just overall surviving, like will be like, you're different, like please get away from us, because like that person like myself is trying to change what has always been. It's ego dystonic now for me to call out certain behaviors, whereas ego syntonic is staying with the familiar. Calling out certain behaviors feels unfamiliar. And so that's what I know for family roles so far, but there are different roles that family members can pick up. But at the end of the day, like looking at it from like a trauma-informed approach, at least that's what I'm doing right now, is that these like roles are picked up as a way to survive. Like everyone's trying to protect themselves or protect like a narrative that has been curated and passed down for generations.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And what would you say to someone that's listening to this episode and they identify with any of the strategies that you mentioned or any of the things that you talked about really? Because you said a lot of different things that a lot of people can relate to when it comes to like being sick, but then when you get tests done with the doctor, everything comes back fine, or when you're anxious and you dissociate with your body, or the different roles that you can play with your family, right? Within your family just to survive and make sure that you're a better person, like deflecting with humor or perfectionism and stuff. And let's say that this person is just like now like thinking, oh wow, like maybe I do have to go down this road of learning about my mental health, learning about my mental state and get better. Like what would be some sort of advice that you would give them?
Mm-hmm. So first I would just because I'm mandated to say this, no, just kidding, actually you should seek like medical like help, so see like a healthcare provider to rule out any like to rule out anything that may be informed by like your health. So like medical issues, like just rule out any medical issues that you may have, and to take a deeper look, because it can be like a medical issue, right? So of course, see your healthcare provider just to kind of rule out anything, and they can help inform you as well. Like a lot of healthcare providers are jumping on board and like are like, okay, mental health is like a real thing, and we should take care of it as much as the physical. But some of the advice, I'm more going to like pose questions that you can ask yourself or that you can journal about, is like, what are you trying to alleviate? Start off there. When you're using like passive aggressive like communication, if you're using humor, or even if you're being avoidant and withdrawing, what are you trying to alleviate in that moment, or what are you trying to protect? And that can help that can be very informative. Like, I'm trying to protect X, Y, and Z. This is something that I've learned my whole life. And so starting off with those two questions, what are you trying to protect or what are you trying to alleviate, can get you to a place that's really reflective and give you a lot of awareness. But other advice would be like, know you picked up these strategies for a reason, and that reason was to protect yourself. So you can give yourself compassion if you did use a certain defense mechanism or a survival strategy to fight off anything. Just give yourself compassion, because at the end of the day, your body and or your brain was trying to protect itself. But then also realize that it's an explanation, not an excuse. And there's a different way that we can go about it so that we don't end up in this cycle, like the vulnerability cycle. Like, we don't end up in that cycle, and we can break through and break free and use different skills and ways that like we aren't familiar to, right? Always go with the unfamiliar. That's something that I learned too, back after college. Like, I was listening to podcasts, I was listening to books, I was a big self-help book lover, and one thing that helped me in my journey was go with the unfamiliar, because what's familiar for you is what's keeping you in this certain like cycle. And that's what I did. I literally had to go in the unfamiliar, something that was really uncomfortable for me, in order for me to find myself in healthier dynamics. or at least speak to people like therapists who were strangers at the time to me that I didn't feel comfortable with, and now I am comfortable with and love as you know, it's my profession now. I had to sit with discomfort for a little bit and know that the discomfort is okay, and that's what's going to break us away from certain cycles and feel ego dystonic in order for us to have like a healthier lifestyle. Yeah.
I love how you said that this is an explanation, not an excuse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really like that because sometimes I feel like people say, "Oh, I have anxiety and that's why I act this way." And even though that's valid, and like you do, like it's good to start there to at least know, right? After what you said, making
Mm-hmm.
sure that you don't have any other health issues. But just because you have anxiety doesn't mean that you should stop there. Like you want to live a life where you don't have worries or anxieties, and not necessarily that you're not going to be able to live, that you will be able to live a life where you don't have to worry, but that you are going to be able to not be overwhelmed by it, I guess is the best way that I can put that. But well, thank you for being here. And we're coming to the end of this interview for the podcast. So I guess I wanted to open up the floor if there's anything else that you wanted to add, that you wanted to share. And I guess also just speak on the fact that this is a spiritual podcast, but this
Mm-hmm.
is more of a real conversation, right, that we're having because we both agree with the fact that, yes, spirituality is important and that does not in any way, shape, or form replace the work that you need to do with your mental health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. I like I said before, I think earlier in this podcast is that it's important to be like culturally informed, at least for myself as a therapist. But when you zoom out, you can't just use one tool. It's not going to help for everything. Like we can't pray away like heart disease or high cholesterol. A lot of the times professionals are going to be like, you can either take medicine or you can change your lifestyle, right? And so you're really taking like advice from professionals, but when it comes to like that's getting like lost in the tracks. Compare your mental health to physical health and know that there are different tools that we can use, and it doesn't have to be like a end all be all. Spirituality is a beautiful tool to use. I really love using spirituality with my clients when I know that they believe in a higher power than ourselves or even a higher power within themselves. Like we should lean into that because it's going to help you, it's going to uplift you during really dark times or during times of struggle. But know that like there's also another side of it. Like there's different things going on, and our mental health is informed by like neurochemicals overall in our brain. And so we have to look at that as well. Like look at what is going on within our brain and how we should take care of it. And so yeah, I mean, I love spirituality and it definitely should be used. And there are practices like just ancestral practices and indigenous practices that are informing a lot of mental health modalities now. You just have to look at it from a different perspective, or at least be culturally like informed, and appreciate it, right? Don't appropriate it. And so just appreciate it and do your research and look into what a lot of these modalities are really probably being rooted in, and know that because it's rooted in that, we can go back to the basics in our life, and that is spirituality. So spirituality is informing a lot of mental health modalities, but that's because there's been a lot of like research and it has helped a lot of people. So yeah, that was like a lot, but that was like a tangent. But yeah, that's all I have to say. Just know that you're not just one being, you're a whole being, and that take different avenues. Like you're overall in a circle when you're a person.
Yes, yes, I love that. Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you,
And
Ashley. Have a good day, okay?
thank you, you too.
Bye.
Oh my gosh, that was such a great episode. It was such a rich conversation that really reeled in mental health and just mental wellness overall. So, again, if you feel like this conversation can benefit somebody else on honestly how beautiful it would be to mix spirituality and mental health for our overall wellness. And I just want to put a disclaimer out there again that definitely reach out to your physician because spiritual health, mental health, emotional health, intellectual health, physical health, all of those things come together. One of them cannot succeed without the other. So, by really being able to find a holistic view and practice within our lives, we are going to be able to be holistic beings. So, definitely like, subscribe, share this episode with someone you feel might benefit with this conversation. And until next time, y'all.